Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Montreal, Canada on June 17th, 2025. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined for the very first time by Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh. He is a Palestinian scientist and author, founder and director of the Palestine Museum of Natural History and the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University, where he teaches. After serving on the faculties of the University of Tennessee, Duke University, and Yale University, he's now in occupied Palestine, in the ghetto of Bethlehem, as he puts it, where Jesus of Nazareth was born. And over the course of his career, Dr. Qumsiyeh has published well over 150 scientific papers on topics ranging from cultural heritage to biodiversity, in addition to several books. For those of us who are deeply involved in the Palestinian cause, we've known of his work for many years. And as I say, this is the first time I've had the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Qumsiyeh. Thank
you very much for having me on your show, Dimitri.
So the first thing I'd like to ask you, Dr. Qumsiyeh, is, since Israel launched this criminal war of aggression on the Islamic Republic, it's my understanding that the occupied West Bank was put into a total lockdown. Could you please summarize for us what conditions have been like in the occupied West Bank since this war was launched, I believe it was on June 12th?
Well, since actually, if we step back a little further than that, since October 2023, Israel immediately tightened the screws on our people here in the West Bank, in addition to accelerating the genocide in Gaza. So there was restrictions on movement already now for 20 plus months since the start of this onslaught on Gaza. And since they started 5 days ago, or so, this attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran, they basically closed the ghettos completely. Before that, there were sometimes some openings of these ghetto walls. Like, for example, I'm in Bethlehem. Bethlehem has been closed off almost hermetically for years, actually. But we were allowed to go out once in a while into other ghettos like the Hebron ghetto and the Ramallah ghetto. Certainly, Jerusalem was off limits to us for years now. When Jerusalem is only like 5 kilometers or so, or 5 miles away from me here, I'm not allowed to go to Jerusalem. But since the attack on Iran began, they basically closed all the gates and stopped delivering even fuel and other things that we used to, of course, forced to buy from the Israeli traders because we're a captive market. So the situation here is getting more desperate. It used to be very bad, and now it's getting more desperate. People here have very little employment. As you know, Bethlehem used to be a religious tourist town, and we had up to 3 million tourists come to visit the birthplace of Jesus. This hasn't been the case for the past 2 years now, or 2 Christmas seasons, if you want. And so unemployment has skyrocketed. But it's now getting even worse, of course, with the latest closure as Israel tries to finish off Gaza and now finish off Iran as they hope they will do.
Mm-hmm. So since this lockdown began, have you at least been able to leave your home and walk in the streets of Bethlehem, or is that also not possible?
No, and within the ghetto, this is like the Warsaw Ghetto. Within the Warsaw Ghetto, people were moving around, but outside, they couldn't go outside the Warsaw Ghetto or the Soweto, for example, in South Africa under apartheid. The ghettos were sometimes closed and you needed a permit to get out of the ghetto. or the concentration camp, if you want. So in the earlier days, you used to be able, for some people, not for most people, you used to be able to get a permission from the colonizers to move from one ghetto or one concentration camp to the other concentration camp if they give you that permission. Uh, but in the past few days, no, you could not move at all from one ghetto to the other ghetto.
And since this genocidal rampage began in October 2023, have you yourself suffered abuse or been subjected to threats at the hands of the occupier, or have you more or less been left alone?
Anytime we go outside of our small areas, as I call them, ghettos or concentration camps, when we were allowed to move somewhat, with or without permission, you are subject to abuse by the settlers and by the soldiers. And on numerous occasions, settlers and soldiers collaborated to harass us. For example, my own field, of course, is biology, as you mentioned, biodiversity. So I was studying plants and collecting seeds of wild plants. And just 3 weeks ago, I was harassed by the settlers who stole some of our equipment. And they even called the Israeli military and Israeli police, who came, instead of getting them to return our equipment, getting the settlers to return our equipment, they actually kicked us out of the area. That's typical, of the kind of harassments that we get under a colonial system. We've lived like this for decades, of course, before the intensification of the killing and murder. I lost 25 of my own personal friends in the West Bank were killed by the Israelis. And in Gaza, I don't keep count anymore. There are probably more than 100 people that I know who were killed in Gaza. These are people I know, and most of them are young. I'm an older man. Most of them are in their 20s or 30s. So it's a very difficult life here, obviously, under colonization. And Israel intentionally tries to make it difficult, and not just in terms of freedom of movement, but freedom of religion, freedom of living, freedom to get our own water. Basically, now we don't have water here. They cut off the water. They want us to leave the occupied territories, just like they want the remaining Gaza population to leave. And that's the plan that Trump and Netanyahu have, is to empty the areas of the indigenous people of the country.
So to the many, many people around the world who are committed to the Palestinian cause, you are, as I mentioned at the outset, a well-known figure. You've eloquently and courageously defended the human rights of the Palestinian people and their dignity for many years now. It seems surprising because the occupier has such a low tolerance for any kind of resistance, or no matter how peaceful it may be, that you have been relatively unscathed. You mentioned, all of the friends of yours, the acquaintances that the occupier has murdered. Why do you think that is? Is it because of the profile that you have had in the United States over the years, the fact that you were an academic at these respected institutions? Why do you think you're still here and still able to express your condemnation of the occupier?
Well, I was arrested and detained over a dozen times by the colonizers. And so I was certainly not left unscathed. But yes, relative to friends and colleagues of mine and other people, I am certainly in a better off shape. I wasn't injured or killed I was beaten a couple of times and things like that. But as to why that is, part of it is I hold U.S. citizenship. Part of it is I do have a very large network of followers, over 60,000 people on my email list, and I have spoken around the world, and I am high profile. I don't know. I'm just speculating as to what the reasons are, but it doesn't mean much, by the way, because I have people that are equally high profile and also even U.S. citizens who were injured or killed by the Israelis. So it may be also ultimately a luck of the draw, as they say.
Right. And so you've mentioned that you are a U.S. citizen. Obviously, you have the legal right to return to the United States as a citizen. Why have you chosen to remain in occupied Palestine during this heinous genocide?
Well, I lived in the U.S. for 25 plus years, and I chose to return to my home country, which is Palestine, in 2008. So I've been back here since then. This is where I was born, and this is where I was raised, and this is central to the situation of global peace, not just local peace, regional peace. Perhaps we can talk about that if you want. But it's a luck of the draw again that I was born here. So obviously, it is important that I use my connections here, my knowledge, my fluent, obviously my mother tongue is Arabic, and my English, having been educated in the United States and gotten to good positions there, to use this knowledge to advance human rights and justice. That's why I returned here. That's why I choose not to go back to the US. Actually, if anything, I regret not coming back here to Bethlehem earlier than 2008. I should have made it a few years earlier, but anyway, in life you look at where you are most useful, where you are most beneficial to what? To human rights, to justice, to advancing peace, because ultimately peace in Palestine, peace in Jerusalem will mean peace in the world. And if you want any evidence of this, just watch what's happening now. The missiles just flew by here in Bethlehem coming from Iran. Why is Iran involved in this? Because Israel attacked them, because Israel is not a country. Israel is a project of a global attempt to dominate and to have hegemony. And this project must be stopped for the sake not just of us, the Palestinians. My family happened to be Palestinian Christian, but not just for the sake of the Palestinians. It's for the sake of all humanity that this project has to be ended.
I couldn't agree more, Dr. Qumsiyeh. I've been said many times that the Palestinian people have the misfortune of being on the front line of a war against humanity. That's what we're witnessing here. And I'm curious to know, as you sit in your home in the Bethlehem ghetto, watching these missiles fly overhead, how has the entry of Iran directly and on a large scale into this conflict, to the extent you are able to gauge it, how has this affected the morale of the people, the Palestinians living under occupation in your community? Do they see this as a hopeful sign? Are they terrified by what might come next? What is their sentiment at the moment?
Well, the Palestinians have lived, as you know, under this colonial occupation for 3 generations now, since Israel was founded in 1948. My mother was born before 1948. My grandparents lived under the pressure of this colonial occupation. My mother lost her best friend in a massacre of Deir Yassin in 1948. So we've lived under this, and we know this system. And we know what a danger this system is. It's not a danger that developed, because of a war with Hamas or something like that. Hamas was founded in 1988. The Islamic Republic was founded in 1979. These are new phenomena, if you want. The hegemony and the destruction of our society and of humanity started long before that, and actually even before 1948, thanks to the British sponsorship, British-French sponsorship, if you want, of the Zionist project in the 1920s, from the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, the Balfour and Jules-Cambon declarations of 1917, and since then. So we have had over 100 years, actually, of encounter with this colonial project. The question really, if I may rephrase the way you asked it, what does it mean when other countries enter the fray? When Lebanon, for example, entered the fray, or Yemen, what does it mean to us? Of course, anybody who obeys international law and tries to protect people engaged in genocide, to protect the oppressed that are being subjected to genocide, what does it mean to those people who are subjected to genocide? Actually, just yesterday, I was on a phone call with people in Gaza and friends of mine, and one of them had lost both his parents and his siblings, who are still under the rubble in Gaza. And I said, what do you think about this Iran-Israeli conflagration? He said, well, we always hold hope that something will happen that will change our fate so that I can go dig my parents out of the rubble, which is now in a closed military zone that I cannot get to go dig them out of our house. This is how he thought about it, and I can only repeat what he said. I wrote a book on nonviolent resistance called Popular Resistance in Palestine. So I'm not in favor of wars or military confrontations, because usually the civilians are the ones who suffer most in these conflicts. But what can we do when we see unencumbered Israeli American? And by the way, it's not an Israeli genocide of the Palestinians, Israeli US and Britain and France and Germany that are participating directly, not supporting this genocide, participating directly in this genocide. And now, of course, they are participating directly in the war against Iran that Israel started. Iran did not start this war. Israel started the war against Iran. And there are American personnel here in this country where I'm speaking to you from, which is Palestine, will always be Palestine, even though it was now called Israel, a Jewish state. But it has always been Palestine. Geographically, Israel is, as I said, is a project of imperialism. So, this is what it is. And any kind of country that wishes to help us in the way they feel they need to help us, certainly the vast majority of Palestinians support this.
I'd like to talk to you now about sort of the political sentiments in occupied Palestine amongst the Palestinian people. Western propagandists would like us to believe that because the events of October 7th were followed by this genocidal war on the Palestinian people, that affection for the resistance groups, shall we say, has been diminished. And I guess I ask you a difficult hypothetical, and if you don't feel you're in a position to answer it, I would certainly understand. But if there were an election held today in occupied Palestine, and the Palestinians living under occupation, were permitted to conduct a campaign openly and freely, and to exercise their right to vote openly and freely, what do you think the most likely outcome of that election would be?
Well, to answer your question, you have to realize you cannot have free elections under occupation. This is like prisoners being told they can choose prison representatives under prison conditions. Of course, some of the prisoners will choose the tough guys, the people who are willing to confront the prison guards. And some people will choose the more accommodating prisoners who are willing to talk to the prison guards that would allow them to have an extra hour in the sunlight, so to speak. But this is not a fair kind of poll, if you want, of who in the prisoners support which of those prison representatives, the prisoner representatives, the tough guys or the more accommodating guys. So in our case, it's like saying, the tough guys are the Hamas and Islamic Jihad, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, who are for basically resisting and for being strong with the prison guards. And the accommodating guys are like Fatah and those parties that are more thinking that they can get more freedoms within the prison confines by being more accommodating to the prison guards. And the numbers of support for those will fluctuate, of course, depending on the time you take the poll and the conditions and variations. The latest polls that show basically we're square one, basically. Hamas and the resistance forces that are associated with them, like Islamic Jihad and Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, would probably get about 30% of the vote. The Fatah movement and its associates will get about 25% of the vote. That's about 55% of the vote. And the rest of the Palestinians are people like me, independent and non-affiliated, and will not vote for either of those two areas, so to speak. That's how it is. That's how you would expect under conditions of prison. But I personally am against any kind of voting under conditions of occupation. If you look at South Africa, Nelson Mandela and the ANC refused to have any kind of voting until apartheid actually physically ended, so that you have one person, one vote. That's when you allow for voting, and that's when you have freedom of vote. And the outcome of that will be very, very different, of course, than those numbers that I quoted to you now based on polls under occupation.
Now, another question that's arisen in terms of political orientation of the Palestinian people, where the occupier would like very much for the world to believe that if the Palestinians, and particularly those in Gaza, were given the opportunity to leave and to be resettled in some other country in West Asia, that they would take it. What is your sense, based upon your conversations with your comrades in Gaza and so forth? Do they remain determined to remain on their land, or have conditions become so horrible, so mind-bogglingly inhumane, that many of them would be prepared to abandon Palestine?
Well, the population of Gaza, the latest estimates is that it had dropped from 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza to 1.85 million Palestinians in Gaza. So we are talking about 450,000, nearly 500,000 Gazans are gone. Where are they gone? At least half of them were killed, of course. That's not counting the injured people, of course, which is more than that. But the others, there's about 150,000, 200,000 that already left Gaza. This is actually available numbers from Egyptian authorities, because the Egyptian authorities were milking the people of Gaza who could afford to bribe the Egyptian authorities $5,000 or $10,000 per person to get out through the Rafah crossing before Israel completely sealed that, and now talking about removing people via other means. So there's already people who left Gaza. And indeed, I have friends who refuse to leave Gaza, even when they could afford to leave Gaza, even when I told them, if you want, I could send you money if that's what you want. But they said, no, we don't want to leave Gaza. So there are some friends of mine who stayed in Gaza. There are some friends of mine, totally, I respect their decision, decided to leave Gaza. They have young children. They don't want to die. Nobody wants to die. So they chose to leave Gaza. So there's different perspectives on this, just like there's different perspectives, as we said earlier, about the factions that Palestinians follow or associate with. That's natural for people. We are people like any country, like any people. Native Americans, after initial colonization, there are natives who fought to the deaths, and there are natives who were willing to march in the March of Tears because they didn't want to die. That's what it is. It's expected that people behave in the way that they feel is the most convenient for their experiences, for their background, for their knowledge, etc. But as I said, there are people, Native Americans, who fought to the death, and they were obliterated. We know that. Genocide of Native Americans.
Yes. My final question to you, Dr. Qumsiyeh, is about the future. I've talked about this quite a bit, but of course I'm not living under occupation. And my own view is that even before the entry of the Islamic Republic into a direct war with the genocidal entity, this massive U.S. military base masquerading as a country was in very serious trouble. For a variety of reasons. Of course, it has become perhaps the most despised nation on earth. Its economy has taken numerous hits. Now it's seen its infrastructure rapidly degraded by these attacks. Its army, by many accounts, is exhausted. There's rampant corruption in this government, which has gone completely unaddressed. There are many reasons, objective reasons, in my view, to be skeptical about the future of Israel, and to be quite optimistic, or I don't want to use the word optimistic, but to be positive about the future of the Palestinian people, notwithstanding the absolutely unspeakable suffering they're being made to endure right now. What is your feeling about the future of the Palestinian people and this Zionist colony under whose oppression they have had to live? Do you feel that the moment of liberation may be at hand, that this is something you're likely to witness in your lifetime?
Well, I hope I live to see it. I am hopeful, optimistic to some level, at the level of energy, as Gramsci said, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. We have to be hopeful, because we really have two choices here. Either we continue down the same road in which obviously the US and Israel engage in not endless anymore, wars, because they are now leading to a global war, nuclear war, in which the only winners will be cockroaches because they are resistant to radiation. That's the path we've been on as countries, as governments around the world, allowing the US and Israeli hegemony to proceed. Either we continue there, or we take the path that we end this charade, we end this horrible, horrible situation for humanity. Again, not just for the Palestinian people. We have to remember the U.S. has something like $37 trillion debt, government debt only, not counting the corporate and private debts. And half of that is related to wars that the U.S. engaged in on behalf of Israel. Half of it is related to wars on behalf of Israel. Unless we end this and go down the other path, we are all doomed. Not you and me and the Zionists and the non-Zionists and everybody else. So these are our choices. If you ask me as a scientist, as an observer, I say, now I used to say it's 70-30 probability. Now I say it's 50-50 probability that we end up with one of these two scenarios. And if we end up with the more horrible scenario of obliterating civilization and having nuclear war, as a biologist, I say, well, cockroaches need to get their chance as humans got their chance, and they screwed it up with climate change and all this stuff, and with destruction and wars that are to benefit billionaires like Trump and Musk and those racists, genocidal racists. I remain optimistic. Whether it's 30% or 50% probability is still definitely worth working for, to have that peace, to have that sustainability of human and natural communities. That's why I volunteer, and I returned as a volunteer, by the way, in 2008 to Palestine. I work 7 days a week, 15 hours a day as a volunteer. I don't get salary from anybody.
Speaking for myself, I would fight to the bitter end, even if the chances of success were only 10%. But I suspect you feel the same way, Dr. Qumsiyeh. And by the way, to be clear, I don't think the chances of success are that low. I think we have a much better chance than that. But there's no doubt we live in my mind, at any rate, the most dangerous time in human history. And with that, I hope very much that you remain safe, Dr. Qumsiyeh, and that we'll have opportunities to speak again in the future. It would be our pleasure to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And for now, I'm signing off from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on June 17th, 2025.